settle in. This one might take a minute. We're talking about using powerful solid-state speaker amplifiers to drive headphones, and specifically we're talking about a bit of a head-to-head here between the Benchmark AHB2 and not one but two Schiit Aegir run as monoblocks. This is a lot of steel and iron to be throwing, and aluminum and other things to be throwing at headphones. But when you're talking about headphones like the Susvara or another stablemate from Headphone, the HE6, these are notoriously hard to drive headphones that have bested many of the best amps. And both of these headphones have been out for quite a while, and there's other challenging headphones that have been in the market for a while as well, like from Abyss and whatnot. And so headphone specific manufacturers have certainly brought a lot of new, very powerful headphone amps to the table, but they're typically very expensive. And so there's a ton of conversation in like the Susvara thread on Headphone in particular about, leveraging really, not really beefy, because these actually aren't super beefy in the world of speakers, but beefy speaker amps to drive them. So I'd always been curious. And so I, I've had this Susvara for a while, and I started just trying, had like various amps plugged in through an adapter, and, there's lots of ways to connect your Susvara depending on how brave you are. You can go with some straight plugs out to a balanced adapter and run that. You can build a box and put some load in there so that you maybe have a little bit more protection. Up to you how much risk you tolerate. I've been relatively risky in the past, and so tried pushing both these headphones and a few others with a couple of like tube speaker amps, like I had the Declaratory in my main system, and like a Bottlehead Stereo more. It's a 2A3 sort of integrated, very simple integrated amp. Tried. So I had a First Watt Sit 3 on loan for a while. I tried a single Aegir, and just there was something really compelling and interesting there about these hard to drive headphones, where you felt just the weight and the power of these amplifiers, but I never got to the magical levels of the things I was reading on the forum. But everyone says the Benchmark AHB2 is the amp to try. And so one of them came into my life, and unrelated at the same time, or nearly the same time, a second Aegir came into my life. And this has been running on my speaker setup, and I had one of these. Oh my goodness, there's going to be so much grunting. I apologize. I had one of these guys running as sort of like a backup solid state option on my speaker system when I didn't want to warm up all the tubes, or I wanted to leave something playing background music and whatever, watching TV and stuff. And I thought it was a really nice amp, and at the price, I was totally satisfied with it. But I'd been hearing about how great these things were as monoblocks, and no kidding, just sort of night and day. Like these two together is not. It's just a different thing than one of these on their own. So I got to thinking, and I actually saw somebody reference I think this idea of running these monoblocks for your Susvara, which is always funny, just to think about this much. Anyway, so perfect. It's like let's do a comparison. Sounds good. So the setup's kind of entertaining. Don't normally do a lot of how the sausage is made, but Brian over at Zynsonics, he'll have to say if that's the right way to say the name of his company, has put a couple things together for me, one of which is this handy dandy balanced XLR switcher, which allows 2 sources and 2 outputs, which is great because I could play with different source options. And then routing, I was using these World's Best cables. These are kind of nice because you can get all the components are really nice, like that they choose, and you can pick sort of between, like, these are the Neuratech with some Mogami, and you can even, you know, Mogami's got a tons of variants, so you can kind of decide which thing you like the best and how much you care about the connectors and the lengths and everything, and they have like almost all of it always available on Amazon. So anyway, we, you know, XLRs into so yeah, so this guy XLRs in the back. So the source for the primary source I was using for this was a Halo Spring 3 with the integrated preamp, which is nice because these things don't have volume controls. You need to control the volume somehow. XLR in the back there. The Aegir are kind of interesting. If you run them in stereo, you plug in RCAs, and if you're running them in mono, you use that XLR, and then you use a different configuration of the speaker taps. So anyway, XLR balanced out of the DAC. DAC's doing the volume management for us, sort of acting as a preamp, so we have one less component, which I think is important because in many ways I think some of the preamps I was using to do my tests were adding a little too much color. And then from there, you know, using some decent quality headphone speaker cables back into another box from Brian. This one's super cool. This is like normally sits in my main system, and what it allows me to do is run 2 power amps in and 1 speaker and 1 sub out, or 2 speakers, and then out the front I have taps for 4-pin XLR for headphones. So basically I can kind of use this to route the 2 different power sources back to the headphone. All of that is to say that I was able to do some very fast A/Bing between the 2, which is really helpful. I also think it's nice to just listen to one thing for a day and then listen to the other thing for a day. So I did a mix of both, but there's just so many cables. This would be such a beast without those boxes to kind of do efficiently. So, okay, let's talk about the darling. This guy is, you know, I immediately like this better than any other speaker amp I'd used to drive. And it could be that the setup was a little better too, and that there wasn't a preamp in the way, but I think genuinely it's easy to understand why people like this and like the pairing with the Susvara in particular. You know, it's clean, but it's not cold. You know, there's like a decent presence in the mid bass. It's actually got almost like a little bit of a smoothness has sort of surprised me, because I do think it's at its heart a bit of an analytical beast. Sometimes it felt a little bit reserved, or like it was sort of holding back or lacking a bit of authority. But you know, with the Susvara, it was powerful. It was full sounding. You know, very clean, very transparent. Some of the best bass I've heard on the Susvara, which is always the thing that people worry about with this headphone, and always the thing they point to with speaker amps, is that you finally get that delivery of bass and sub bass that you've wanted. Comes a little forward, I think, and it's just got a heft to it that isn't present on a lot of the other amps I've tried with this headphone. So as I start to like tick off one versus the other, so if I were characterizing the AHB2 in sort of comparison to the Aegir Monoblocks, I'd say it's got a sense of like precision to it. It's got a sense of like a lot of detail with like the whispery stuff, like breathy stuff and detail, like that kind of that more hi-fi sound. Like those little crispy bits are really nice. Like I said, it's a little cleaner, it's a little drier. I think it's a touch more open sounding, and I suspect that's because maybe it's just a smidge darker and a little smidge blacker in the backgrounds, and that gives you that slight elevated sense of openness. But I found things like strings, like violins and stuff, less enjoyable than on the Aegir. They just felt like a bit more staccato or like a bit more fatiguing somehow. And there's a less decay for sure. Like things kind of are just more tightly sprung, I guess I'd say, that they don't sort of fade into the abyss. They kind of end a little bit more noticeably. All right, Aegir, we've talked a lot about this guy. Scoot over. Ooh. So, and these things are heavy, and their fins are super sharp. I really appreciate the radius that they put on their fins. Like, not that you really carry around your amp by its heat sinks very often. Ooh. Right, so on this guy, I'd say the bass digs deeper for me, and it hits harder. There's more fullness to the upper mids. The mids and upper mids just come a bit forward. There's almost like a kind of a warm embrace when you'd switch back to the Aegir Monos. It's a little bit more romantic, honestly. I think you could say maybe on occasion it felt a little more smeared, maybe. But I think I'd hear something where I was like, oh, that's some softness. Let me go back and see how the Benchmark would do that. And then I'd come back to it and it wouldn't really be there. So I don't know how much of that I was sort of pushing to try to differentiate the two. It definitely felt a little more tactile and a little more like sort of natural and honest. There's like that sort of analytical side on the Benchmark that like you don't get as with the Aegirs. And just a bit more sort of ambiance. Like, I was listening to the song Liquid Amber by this group, Fohn Trio. It's Foehn. And there's a section of like this drumming, just percussion, and it's just so snappy and energetic, and there's this space between things and the other instruments. It's just so happy listening to that. I had more of those moments with the Aegis where I'd just be like, music. And I'd have a little more moments here. I was like, ooh, technical prowess. And so, take that as you will. Yeah, I did try just one of these. I went back and said like, oh, what's one Aegir sound like? And there, like, it's not like the Benchmark's operating at a much higher level. And you can do a bridge mono mode, so you can monoblock these things. But that's crazy. Power wise, these guys in mono are about 80 watts per channel, and this guy's 100 watts per channel. So they're pretty equally matched in a set of monoblocks to a single Benchmark in terms of power rating and 8 ohms. Once you like monoblock or bridge mono this thing, it's like 400. It's ridiculous. And these one by themselves are only like 20 watts in stereo mode, which I've always loved high efficiency speakers, so that's never been a problem for me. But these things anyway. I think that any of these amps are really like getting to really pushing towards the limits of what something like the HE6 is can do. I don't know that that's true with the Susvara. I think there's still more room on the Susvara, and going to other headphone specific amps with the Susvara, I've heard more. I've heard more than what either one of these can do for the Susvara. But it doesn't mean it's not doing great things. I just think it's not the end, right? It's never the end. It's never the end. From a livability standpoint, right? It's like this thing is, like half the size. No, not really. It's like whatever. It's like whatever. It's not as big as one of these, and now you got two of these. It's lighter. The fins won't cut you, and it has a power button on the front, which guess what? That's really handy. when it's like sitting on your desktop. These guys have the power box and the switch, and then they have sort of like a little standby mode that you can put them in with the switch on the front, which I found they were still super hot, so I don't know what they're doing. They're still using plenty of power. These definitely get hotter. This guy stays a little bit cooler. You know, he uses some heat, but so like livability, if you want these things on your desktop, like obviously the Benchmark is much more friendly. Cost is tricky. So Benchmark, $3,000. Each one of these guys, $900. So $1,800 versus $3,000, like 40% more to move to the Benchmark from the Monoblocks, from the Aegirs. To my ear, I enjoy the sound produced by the Schiit Aegir Monoblocks with both speakers and headphones than I do Benchmark. If you've watched other videos and you have some sense of my sound taste, I love tubes. Like, I like a little more fluidity, a little more romance, just a little bit more of a natural sound. All these cliche terms, I know, but I'm just trying to tell you what I like. The Benchmark is that slightly more analytical, slightly more precise and rigid tone, a technical master, but, you know, price agnostic. I would still choose space. If I didn't care about space and heat, I would still choose these guys within the context of this comparison. But yeah, so like I said, it's like there are better things still to power the Susvara, but for $1,800, especially if you have a way to control volume that's not going to add a bunch of coloration or degrade the quality of your signal before you get to these guys, it's a really great solution. Benchmark's also awesome, really easy to live with, more expensive. What are you gonna do? Okay, that's more than anyone needed to hear about that. Okay, yeah, it was Sandcraft signing out.